Hi everyone, I'm Bandish, founder of The Curious Mindset. The Curious Mindset is a private, invitation-only community for technology leadership teams, powered by 64 Tech, a technology provider across hardware, cloud, and IT services. Now, while 64 Tech supports the platform, the real value of this community comes from the people in this room. As responsibility grows, technology leaders are expected to move faster, decide with less information, and carry much more weight, often without the space to think things through properly. Many leaders end up stuck in reactive mode, firefighting, buried in strategy decks, and chasing delivery. And somewhere in all that noise, the space to think clearly quietly disappears. That's why we built the Curious Mindset, a space for technology leaders to step out of the noise and have honest conversations with people who understand the pressures of the role. No membership fees, no intrusive sales methods, just human connection and valuable perspectives from experience. For those joining us for the first time, a quick bit of context. I started this community at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, I think nearly 6 years ago today. Now, whilst most organizations like 64 Tech focus on selling and marketing, I chose to build something very different. A place where technology leaders feel they belong and have a circle they can lean on, not a network they scroll past. Our belief is simple. Technology leaders lead better when they are not figuring it out alone. And that belief sits at the heart of 64 Tech's mantra, Together We Grow. Thank you all for being here. Now it's my pleasure to hand you over to our host, Andy McMenemy, our resident technology leader co-host, Steve Maxwell, and our very special guest, Nicki Bass.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to the Curious Mindset session. It's my great pleasure to be the host again, and first of all, to thank Bandish. I mean, for 6 years now, Bandish, 64 Tech have used their marketing budget to support this community. None of us would be here today without that support and that generosity. So thank you so much from the heart for everything that you do and continue to do for the community. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce a speaker who I'm going to thoroughly enjoy interviewing. Nicki Bass is a distinguished business psychologist. She's also a former Army officer and a specialist in leadership and resilience development. Now, Nicki sits between the kind of academic world of research and the practical day-to-day stuff that all of us love to hear about. So today's session is going to be about the practical side, or the practical human side, of leading through volatility and change. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the Curious Mindset community, Nicki Bass.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's so lovely to be here and be with you all.
It's great to see you, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed our little preamble talk, and I know there's a lot of great stuff coming down the pipeline towards everybody in the next hour, Nicki. So talk to us about leadership. What is it you're interested in and have been researching, and what practical tips are you going to share with us today?
Thank you so much, Andy. It's so lovely to be here and be with you all.
It's great to see you, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed our little preamble talk, and I know there's a lot of great stuff coming down the pipeline towards everybody in the next hour, Nicki. So talk to us about leadership. What is it you're interested in and have been researching, and what practical tips are you going to share with us today?
So leadership, I mean, leadership's such a huge topic. I think my interest, I guess, really spans across, I guess, areas that tend to be held a little bit sort of separate a lot of the time. So resilience can often sort of sit in that well-being space about how we look after ourselves and look after our people. Leadership is seen as something slightly harder edge. This is how we get people to do what they need to do and how we manage, whether it's systems or products or, the team around it. And I'm really curious, I guess, about that interface and about how leaders are always so much more effective when they also take care of themselves and when they protect their own boundaries. They think about how it is they show up for their people, how they manage their own emotions, but also how they build relationships with the people that they lead too. Because I always, whenever I'm talking about resilience, I always love to remind people that it's not an individual pursuit. It's we are pack animals at the end of the day. We operate in relation to other people, and into our environment as well. And so how we support others, how we are supported is absolutely fundamental to how we lead as well.
And that was a great point that you mentioned there. Leadership is, it's not about the individual. It's about how they show up for their people, right? In all aspects of the role. In the good times when everything's going great and the team's winning, and in the times when we're behind the ball and, not getting the results we need, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the test of leadership in the end is what happens when it's not going well. I think it's easy to lead when things are going in the direction you want to, because one, you are getting positive reinforcement that whether it's to do with you or not, that the way in which you're doing things is working. The pressures on you tend to be less, whether those are financial pressures, whether those are, practical pressures. When everyone's going in the sort of things look great, or we feel that we've got the space to do the things we want to, it's a much easier job. I think leadership is the test of leadership is when you are operating in either a challenging environment or a chaotic environment or an environment that is not the way in which you would ideally like to show up, and how you manage your own feelings about that, and what you do with those feelings, I think is really important as a leader too.
And I guess it's fair to say that, leadership per se, going way back into the kind of industrial era, largely came from the military after the First World War, right? So, and sales meetings, all that sort of stuff came from officers' briefing meetings. And I wonder how much of military leadership practices are still relevant for commercial business today, Nicki.
I find it really interesting because I think I was in the regular army for 17 years. So I left in 2017. And in that time I've worked in, since I've worked in commercial environments, and I see so many of the practices and things that we've talked about coming across. I also think there's quite a misconception often about what military leadership is, because it tends to be portrayed in war films, or we have an idea, or on documentaries or programs we see on TV, which sort of hams up I guess the more directive approach to
the command and control approach.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, that absolutely has its place.
Sure.
And there are reasons why that happens. It's not necessarily the most effective way of dealing with people in the commercial environment. And I think what it doesn't show always is actually the majority and the best leaders that I've worked with in the military are those who fall into, I suppose, the softer side of leadership, that are build really good relationships with their people so that they will do difficult things, that are constantly engaged with creating a space that people feel free, because we use a principle called mission command, which is effectively that the leader's not telling you what to do the whole time, that actually people have a lot of freedom to, they've got the intent, they know what they're supposed to be doing, then they go off and create their own plan and take their people with them. And that operates right down to the lowest level. And in order for that to work, actually there has to be a huge amount of trust that your people are going to do that. And trust isn't usually built in an environment where people are afraid of the people that are telling them to do things, or where haven't got space to think creatively. So I think those principles I see coming across more and more. And I always go back to, when I started at Sandhurst, it served to lead is the motto. And actually that fact that you're showing up in order to allow other people to thrive and to grow and to develop their potential, I think is such an underpinning principle.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've often heard it said that, the test of a business's culture is how the staff feel on Sunday night about the prospect of going to work tomorrow, right? And I guess a really good leader can be that kind of as you would sort of nail the colors to the mast, it can be that pivotal focal point where people find a sense of comfort and a sense of, as you said, trust. So even though the culture might not be ideal and the pressure may be intense, if you've got a strong leader that you feel has got your back and you trust them, well, I guess you'll give a lot of discretionary effort.
No, I think that's so true. I often, when I'm working with leaders, I do a lot of coaching with leaders as well. And I'm often sort of saying, think about what you're holding for people, because often when people show up and they're feeling really overwhelmed, or they're like, I just don't know what to do in this situation, or I'm feeling sort of buffeted around. I'm like, you're not only holding a sort of making a decision or doing the do, you're actually holding a safe space for people in order that they can show up. I think, that's such an important point you make about, how do you feel about going into work on a Monday? I think that so much of that rests with a leader. And I think when, as leaders, we start to recognize actually a lot of the work that I'm doing is not the overt obvious, I've made this decision doing this thing. It's the what I'm doing to support people so that they can do their best work. I think we can start to also recognize the pressure it puts on us and actually why we need that support too. But yeah, I think really recognizing what you're doing overtly, but also what you're doing behind the scenes. And again, I would go back to the best leaders I work with are the ones where you feel like you can try and even if it doesn't go quite as right as you'd like it to, you're supported in doing that. And yeah, so I think that's really vital.
And I wonder whether there is anything you can shed light on for us, because some people are by nature extroverted and outgoing, and others are more introverted and not so kind of outgoing. How does an introverted leader show up in a way that gives people the confidence to be able to have a conversation with them?
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's in a way, sort of leadership is sort of almost seen as a personality trait. It's like if you're this is what a leader looks like. Again, probably not helped by popular culture. This is what a good leader looks like. This is what, and actually, again, I'd say the most effective leaders are the ones who are the most confident in themselves, but that's not overt, projected confidence. It's about I've got the confidence to be able to hold the uncertainty, to not project that onto other people, to not feel like I need to show people up in order to look good for myself because I'm feeling insecure. And I've seen very loud sort of, an extrovert introvert can be sometimes a bit misnomer because we can all be different in different situations.
Sure.
I often think we're far more extroverted usually in situations where we feel comfortable. And I can certainly think of, all sorts of situations in my career where I've not said a word versus where I'm basically dominant, fully involved in the situation. It's normally, do I feel free to be myself? Am I confident that who I am and how I show up, that's okay, that's enough. I'm enough before I even start. So therefore, I think it's also then again recognizing that we operate as part of a team, even if as the leader we're in a different place within that team. I think the best teams are a combination of personalities and strengths and using and relying, going, actually, I might not be the person who loves public speaking. Actually, I can build on that. I can learn how to do it. But there'll probably be situations where there might be somebody else who is, that I can push forward and, they can develop and learn from taking on a particular role. That might be their strength or a strength they want to develop. It's not having to see it as all sitting with you and you having to be this perfect person. You can just be yourself, and work on the bits that obviously, that might be required of your job, but that's the same as any job skill, I think.
Thanks. And one thing that does spring to mind for sure, and it came up in our preamble, is that, I know all of our tech leaders in the room today have got all the time in the world to do everything that they need to do. That includes the work they need to do from their own responsibilities, the team they need to manage, the individual they need to spend some time with. And we spoke a little bit about John Adair's model, which is used at Sandhurst. So maybe you could perhaps help to unpack some of that for us, Nicki.
Yeah, I mean, I think I often come back to that model. I mean, it's like you speak to anyone in the military or ex-military, they're like, oh, okay, John Dares, yeah, we know that very well. But basically, I really like it because it's just so simple. This idea, and basically, it's called his three balls, the team, task, individual, and it really, I think, as a leader, is a great way of thinking about how am I using my time across these three areas? If I find that I'm giving all my time to the task, then I'm probably neglecting the team and the individual to some extent. And also there will be different times where one or other of those aspects is more important, has to take priority due to time pressures, due to whatever's most critical at that time in the business. But it's not forgetting the others. And I think it's a great reminder that whatever we're doing, it's comprised of these different aspects. And as a leader, you're almost, you're sort of you're above that in a way. You know, a great friend of mine, it sort of talks about that, this sort of helicopter model where actually as a leader, you're looking over those different things and thinking, okay, what needs to dial up, what needs to dial down, what needs my attention right now? And often when things leap up and surprise us, it's because it's something we've not necessarily been paying attention to, often for great reason. But I think it's just, it's nice to have a model that's really simple, but that you can just sort of pull yourself back on when you've got a moment to reflect too.
Yeah, and it's obviously fair to say that from a military leader perspective, whenever leadership is really called upon, which will be in times of conflict or in theatre, it's an ever-changing environment, right? The terrain is constantly changing. The enemy never plays to the same playbook, and so there's a lot of volatility. What can we learn from military experience that can help us to anchor our team then, when we're facing, as we are sometimes right now, a lot of volatility out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is coming at a particularly volatile time as well. So I certainly won't pretend to have all the answers on this, but I think from my experiences, I think there's some psychological principles and then there's some sort of system principles around this. And I think a psychological principle I always come back to is what are the things you can control and what's the things you can't control? Sort of the idea of a locus of control effectively, because we spend so much of our energy naturally focusing on things that aren't within our control and worrying about them because that's like it's totally normal. But actually, if we can catch ourselves when we're doing that, even if it is at 3 a.m. when you're caught in that sort of doom spiral, it's thinking, okay, there are things here that I can probably do something about, and there are things here that actually I can't. They're either not in my control because they're in somebody else's pay grade, or they are, or they're out there in the world and there's something I don't have direct influence on. What are the things that will help? And the reason I like to think of it in this way is because it can help reduce the overwhelm when we're able to go, okay, this is something I can do. It's not everything, it doesn't change, but this is one thing that I can do. And then I think it also relates to, one of the things that the military does is it has things that it's got procedures that you follow. It's got a very clear set of systems that everybody understands, that becomes a shorthand to how you operate, but also gives you a handrail when things are chaotic. And one of the things that I find really helpful personally, and that's something I've taken forward, is this idea that if we continue to use our systems, even if the context is changing, even if, there's lots of demands on our time, but there are certain things that we do that we either know help us, so they might be personal sort of well-being practices, or there might be systems that we have embedded in the way in which we operate. For example, showing up for meetings every week, regardless of what's going on, or, certain things that we can absolutely rely on. That allows us, because part of it is about decision overwhelm. And if we have too many decisions to make, then we find we can't make any. So actually, what are the things that absolutely I need to focus on, and what decisions do I absolutely have to take, and what decisions do I not have to take because they're either part of the routine or because I have delegated those to somebody else because actually they're perfectly capable of doing those. So there is a number of different touch points, I think, which just allow you to think, if I accept that I operate in this environment that is uncertain and volatile, what are the things that I need to do that allow me to still function and think when everything else feels sort of difficult to pin down?
And that's a really good point, because that's personal responsibility, isn't it? And I guess when everybody is so busy, it's finding that space to have a little bit of privacy so you can put it into context and then have a strategy for how you advance what it is you need you need to focus on. And I was fascinated by something you said earlier on, Nicki, about it's not about micromanaging. Leadership is not about micromanaging. It's about giving agency. And I guess one of the things the military do sometimes exceptionally well is that clarity of communication.
Yeah. So I think, and every business will have this in the end. You'll all have like shorthands to things, whether they are, acronyms, whether they are particular words or, ways in which we talk about things. That everyone's got a shorthand to allow it to communicate. I think the thing that enables communication, good communication more than anything, is trust. And I think so building, if you can, because I think when we see those images of like people shouting at each other or being really directive, or the reason that is allowed or permitted, it's a permitted way of behavior because the trust has been built about why that is necessary in that moment. And there will be certain moments where you don't want to operate in anything other than incredibly clear direct communication, and there'll be other times where that's not appropriate. And if you're always using one method of communication, then chances are you're probably not applying it in the way in which it's intended. So I think with communication, it's always thinking what's the most effective, what's needed, and what trust and permission have I built to be able to, in those critical moments, go, right, this is the point which you really need to move and to be direct, but that's not coming from a place of criticism or anger or whatever else we might perceive it to be, because actually at other times it's not, and that it is a tool that you use in your toolbox, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess that's the one thing with the military, is that it's all about training and training and training to, have that kind of stress inoculation, isn't it? So that, the clarity is there. And I guess the training does one major purpose, which drops it into an unconscious behavior then, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So, you're trying to find a shorthand effectively to be able to get to everyone to where they need to be as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So I wonder, when it comes to individual leaders then, how would you encourage people to take that agency another step forward? One of the things that I'm mindful of, because this happened for me, Nicki, in my corporate career, is I collapsed through stress into a convulsive fit. So if you'd asked me, I'd never have said I was anywhere near burnout. I'd have said I was incredibly stressed, but absolutely focused and engaged in the process, but I never saw it coming. And how can we help people to appreciate when they're getting to the pinnacle of their capabilities and when they need to then intervene and have that personal kind of state of mind of, I need to do something now?
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult because I think we are really bad as a species, not like individuals, at we are incredibly, I suppose, resilient or grit orientated where it needs to be. So we will get through and get things done. And we'll often, I think, as leaders, we have such a sense of responsibility that this rests on me, and therefore I need to show up and I need to look like I'm in control and knowing what I'm doing for my people. And this is because we're conscious that a lot of other people's maybe well-being or ability to do their roles, we feel rests on that. So I think it comes back partly to this word permission and seeing ourselves not in separate boxes. I'm like a human being here, and I'm a leader here, and I'm this job here, whatever it is. It's that actually I'm a human and I'm a leader, and I am all of these multiple responsibilities, and that is all part of the package. But I know it's a really overused analogy, but this idea of putting on your oxygen mask first, I think, is so fundamental to leadership, because it's incredibly hard to be empathetic and to show up for other people and to take on, all of that responsibility when we are low on resources ourselves. I know for myself, I mean, I just relate it even with my kids. If I haven't had enough sleep and if I'm overworked and I'm strung out, I will snap like nothing, and it can be the smallest trigger. And suddenly I'm like, okay, that's tipped me over the edge. We're human beings. And when our resources are low, our resilience is low. So it's not like the resilience is a thing out there that we've either we're good at and we've got or not. it's something that changes over time. It will change depending on the pressures in our personal lives at any given time, what else is going on for us in terms of our health, in terms of, so there's a whole load of things that go into it as well as just the work. And we can keep, and if particularly, I think this is where purpose is such a double-edged sword. If we are someone who is very purpose driven and has a strong sense, like our values are, I show up, I work really hard, I do what's needed for the people around me, then actually to step back and go, right now, actually, I can't show up in this way, or I need to fill my own cup at this point, can feel very challenging. And it's why I think burnout is such a, I think such a much more common experience than I think we recognize, and particularly around people who've got these sort of what term type A personalities, or people who are very driven, because one, it feels really shameful to turn around and go, actually, I feel like I'm struggling with this. And shame is like the key driver of human behavior, our avoidance of it. And so I think it's hard to say we need help. Two, we don't even recognize it in ourselves because we think, no, I can just keep fighting through this. And I think so there's a whole load of problems, I guess. In terms of what we can do about it, I think it goes back to those practices that we all know within ourselves. There are things that help us to feel better and cope when, whether it's exercise, whether it's, we'll all have different things that work for us. I'd say there's 2 points to start noticing. The first is when you start to get niggly physical symptoms like a cold sore or a cold, or something that you can continue to work through, a headache, you take some paracetamol, it's fine. You can continue to work through. It's not the sort of thing where you're going to say, no, I can't go into work today. That's a warning sign for you that actually your immune system, and our immune systems are vulnerable to inflammation. So we are starting to experience something. So pay attention to the really small signs and go, okay, it doesn't mean you don't go into work, but it might be, I wonder what's going on. I seem to be getting consistent colds, or I've got, an ache in my hip, or whatever it is that I can fight through. But I'm going to pay attention to that. And I think the other thing is when you start to drop off the routines that are helpful to you. So you're no longer doing your morning run or your yoga or your skipping breakfast, or because I'm too busy because I've got to get to this meeting, I've got to do this thing, and it starts to build till suddenly you've had a week where you've not done anything that's actually feeding you. And when you start to notice the excuses in your head as to why you can't do those, I'd say that's the other warning sign. That's the bit where you start to pay attention, go, okay, this is, I recognize I'm starting to do this. And I think the third thing is just those relationships around you. When someone's telling you there's something going on, are you okay? Pay heed to that, because often people know you better than you know yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I couldn't see it at the time, but when I reflected afterwards and started asking my peers what they observed in me, they said, "Oh my God, you sigh a lot." What do you mean? Well, every time you get up, you go, which obviously was a sign that I wasn't breathing correctly, right? I was short and sharp as opposed to full inhales. So yeah, I love that. It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. So I wonder if we could maybe just get some clarity around exactly what resilience is from your perception, because there's always a danger that we say a word and we assume everybody understands it exactly the same way we mean it. So what's your favorite definition, if you like, of resilience? How would you explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. I like, if I'm ever talking about resilience, that's normally the first place I start, because I think it's become sort of a bit of a buzzword for a start. It's sort of chucked around everywhere. And I think there's a lot of sort of misconceptions about what it is. So I suppose I use it within, a positive psychology tradition, which, without wanting to get into the sort of academic side of things, is really this idea about that when we're in an adverse situation, when challenges happen, that we find a way through to be able to not return to the same state, but to be able to recover and to at some point experience a form of growth from it. And I'm really deliberately careful with the words I'm choosing around there, because I think one of the things I don't particularly like around, although it's, where the word comes from, this idea of bouncing back, I think that places a huge amount of pressure on people. It's a bit like when
Bounce
you just
forward,
have
bounce
exactly.
forward,
It's
don't go
like when people
backwards.
just had a baby, they're like, you just bounce back, and you're like, no, I'm not bouncing anywhere for a very long time. It's you're never going to return to the same place as you were, because we grow every day doing what, with every experience that we have. Um, and I think it also can feel quite undermining for people who are going through really difficult, challenging things, ranging from, a whole range of life experiences. Um, so it can feel like a pressure that if I am really feeling this, if I am in a place where I feel stuck and confused and depressed, and all of these things are happening, that means I'm not resilient. Because actually, what resilience would look like is if I just stood strong like a mountain and everything was chucked at me, and I would just carry on smiling merrily and carrying on no matter what life throws at me. And one, that's not realistic. Two, that's the quickest route to burnout. And it's sort of absolutely counter to what resilience actually is, which is emotional resilience. Is actually, can you feel the pain and really feel that pain, but also be able to believe at some level in your core being that it will be okay, that I have the resources, and those resources can absolutely include other people, that I have a way to navigate this. At some point, it will feel better, or it will feel different, if not better. And that there is a way for me to still move forward in and amongst what I'm feeling right now. And so when I'm working with people on resilience, it's very much, one of the first things people often say to me is, well, I'm not very resilient, because when something happens, I collapse on the floor and eat chocolate all day, or I feel like I can't go into work, or all of these things. I'm like, absolutely not a sign of anything. That's a sign you're a human being and you feel things. The resilience bit comes from going, what tools and strategies and practices do you have that when things get really hard, you don't fall quite so far as to the point that you can't actually get back up again.
Sure.
And I guess the expanse of time between when you start to be able to move forward is a bit more compressed. And I think, it used to be believed that, resilience was something that you were born with or you weren't. Actually, you're either a resilient person, you're not a resilient person. Whereas when it's now very much, and pretty much all the definitions agree that this is something that you can work on, you can develop, and it's a daily practice. It is always doing things going, I know that this is something that helps me to cope when I experience a shock or I experience something really difficult. And these are the things that I need in my corner.
But we have to be resilient in so many areas of life, don't we? I mean, I don't like to talk about mental health. It's just a big umbrella phrase that means something different to everybody. Mental health for me is the ability to focus on the tasks I need to pay attention to get the outcomes I need to get. So it's clarity of focus and not being distracted by what's going on left or right of me. But, in the complexity of our current world, and using the VUCA analogy, where it's, complex, uncertain, and ambiguous, we have to be, I guess, emotionally resilient sometimes. We've got to be psychologically resilient, physically resilient. And what I'm hearing from you is it's this ability to adapt, isn't it? To recognize that I've got capacity and I've got resources, but how do I use them to get me through this?
Completely. I think adapting is like, a fundamental to resilience. To what experience can I experience a shock and then find a way in which to adapt to what that has brought for me, and or for the team as well. And particularly if we're talking about leaders, you're sort of thinking about how can I. So if these challenges come in all sorts of different directions, but can I stay with that? Can we sort of experience that feeling? Yeah, that's real. That's real. That's happened. We don't deny that something is bad or hard or difficult or, downright awful sometimes. But actually, okay, so then the gap between going, okay, this is where we are and this is really hard, to, okay, so what next? What can we do about this? How do we adapt? How do we change? What are the things that we need in order to do that? That's where the resilience part comes in, because it's going, okay, so yeah, this is really, not ideal, but what is it that what is possible? And it's sort of, I guess it's that again, it comes back to partly that confidence in going, I've got a really good team. We've got the resources, we've got the abilities, we've got the intelligence, we've got all of the things that we need, but we do now need to adapt course because something has changed. How long do we spend sitting in that place of going, God, I wish it was different, versus, okay, what now? Where do we take
Mm.
this to? And what opportunity does that present? And I think it's that thing of being able to look, going, actually, is there an opportunity that can come from this? Even if we have no idea what it might be, and it right now it's pretty well hidden, that experience, that opportunity is possible, I think is a way of framing it, maybe.
I like that. So it's what I'm hearing is it's the ability to both adapt and also to improvise
Hmm.
uh, the way we move forward. And I wonder, from your research aspect, from the amount of work that you do into research on resilience, and then how that applies in practical day-to-day life, is there anything that you have found through your research that's changed your perspective on resilience or leadership?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if it sort of has changed my perspective of resilience. I think so when I did my master's research, going back to looking at sort of resilience and adverse situations and how that helps us to build, there was some really interesting research, particularly looking at, it was actually focused on Olympians and sort of sports teams and that sort of thing, particularly looking at swimmers. So I think what I find really interesting is there's often this idea that um, we can, like, it doesn't matter how big or challenging something is, we should always be resilient in that. Some things are really difficult and very damaging, and it may well cause us to stop in our tracks and that sort of thing. But in terms of what we can do to help build resilience, I guess, into our leadership, into our teams, it's this idea of how can we, if we spend all our time in our comfort zones, if we spend all our time in a place that feels easy, a little bit back to our initial conversation, it's really easy to lead when things are all going really well. Um, how do we constantly challenge ourselves and our team so that we're practiced at doing things that feel uncomfortable, both as
Mm.
an individual level, but also as a team level, and stimulate that creativity, which means that actually when we are in a situation when things are genuinely challenging, we are used to being outside of our comfort zone. We are used to doing difficult things. I think if we take it back to this idea of military training, often you're put in awful situations. You're like, this is really, really miserable. I do not want to be here. But part of the rationale behind that is actually when you are used to, living in awful conditions or dealing with, constant things being chucked at you, actually you become able, it's not that you start going, oh, I really love this, or this is a great way to operate, but you start becoming able to rely on your resources in those situations and going, actually, we've got trust in what we do know about this team when these things happen, that we can then rely on that. So I think, one of the things I find so interesting around all the research, I guess, to do with resilience particularly, is this idea of how do we sort of train ourselves to be able to operate in sort of adverse conditions, not such high stress conditions that we're in panic, but like situations that are difficult, but that are managed, but that do take us to that point where we feel pretty uncomfortable. And can
Mm.
we do that regularly enough so that we're always at some level operating in a place where there is a possibility of things being, outside of the norm. And then it makes the shocks, I think, easier to adapt to, or to become flexible around, because you're going, actually, I'm used to operating in this state.
Mm.
So I think that's something that's really, I guess, I continue to find really interesting.
I guess where the phrase battle hardened comes from, doesn't it? They've had a lot of exposure to the adversity, and therefore they've got competency as a result of the constant stress inoculation that's been developed.
I think so, absolutely. I think that phrase stress inoculation is really interesting. I think the challenge is where we start to switch off. So it's always getting that balance between this is hard, but I'm still operating in a place of growth. I'm still operating in a place of innovation and creativity versus I'm just digging in and hanging in there until it all finishes, knowing that I can endure. Because what we're not trying to do is just endure. We're trying to think about how can we adapt and grow and, change in the face of difficult situations. And I think that's where, I suppose, when we go back to what the definition of resilience is for me, it's not just hanging in there by your fingernails, hoping that, you'll somehow make it through. It's okay, this is the situation, it's changed now. Okay, how do we see the opportunity in that, and how do we find creative ways to move through it?
Yeah, it's kind of enjoying the endurance aspect, isn't it?
Yeah, sort of type 2 fun. Yeah. I do a lot of sort of outdoor adventure stuff as well.
Same,
So
same.
yeah. But I think and inevitably part of the resilience is the ability to endure through some of that too, knowing that you're getting to an outcome that you want to get towards. But I don't think that should be the whole package. Actually,
No.
it should be a place of experimentation and growth too.
Yeah, and it's not just about visualization of the success. It's more accurate. It's visualization of overcoming every single hurdle you're going to have to get over to get to that result, right?
Absolutely. And also, how do we, if that's a hurdle, I might not get over it, but there might be a way to go on a different path that I hadn't considered yet. And how do we think about that? Because actually, that hurdle or that block may be may be real. It may, we can't always think our ways out of problems, but we can learn to sit alongside that, I think, and
Yeah.
and see it as not necessarily a barrier to moving forward. It might just be in a different way.
Over it, under it, round it, or through
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Nicki, I've absolutely loved talking to you, and I don't really want to go silent and give up the microphone to Steve, but I am going to have to introduce Steve onto the stage so that he can field some of the amazing questions I'm sure that not only Steve has, but also that are coming through from the field. So can I just say thank you so much? I've thoroughly enjoyed that little chat and our preamble, and I'm making notes as you're talking. So thank you so much, Nicki. I'm going to invite Steve forward now to field some of the questions for you.